I think it's going to be funny to us looking back in the future at how things worked for so long and sort of the poor user experience that was kind of traditional search and having to sift through these long articles. The trope of course is like the recipe content, right, where you have like 2,000 words of like intro before you get to the recipe because everybody was playing this game, and it's like, well, that was objectively a terrible user experience, but we did it anyway because we had to. That was how it worked. That was just the game.
Hello and welcome to No Stupid Questions, Just Marketing Ones. I'm your host, Jaina Mistry, an email and content marketing strategist with nearly 20 years of experience. I led the email and content programs at Litmus, and now I help brands build email and content strategies that actually connect. Think of this podcast as your agony aunt column for marketing, the place where I take the real questions that keep you up at night and answer them with curiosity, empathy, and just enough snark to make it fun. So, if you have ever spiraled over open rates, rewritten the same landing page 17 billion times, or wondered if your brand voice sounds like it has anxiety, you're in the right place. In this episode, I'm going to answer a question sent in by Taryn Hart from Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. I'm glad that they put the Canada bit in there. But Taryn asks, I'm a content marketing manager, and something I'm more and more interested in is what's going on with blogs right now. Are they still impactful? What should we be focusing on when writing blogs, with shifts happening through AI and SEO? And to help me answer this question, I've invited a couple of really awesome people. So firstly, I want to introduce Tyler Hakes. He is the strategy director and principal at Optimist. He's been helping growth stage companies and market leaders build strategic content programs for nearly 20 years. And current and past clients include the likes of ZoomInfo, Gusto, SEMrush, Superhuman, and HelloSign. And also joining me is Kristen Rocco, who after over 15 years of setting content strategy and leading teams in organizations of all sizes in-house, she now helps B2B clients turn scattered content into category-defining strategy that fuels pipeline, aligns teams, and positions brands as market leaders. So hello and welcome, Tyler and Kristen. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us, Jaina.
So glad to be here.
Awesome. So this question's like, I want to unpack a couple of things in this question. And the first thing that I want to really dive into is these like shifts that Taryn mentioned. What do you see as these shifts? And I've got some data points that I want us to dig into as well. But like, what do you think these shifts are in your perspective? Tyler, why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, everyone is sort of in the same boat there. I think, just it's not in your head. That's certainly an important fact to start with, right? I think we've seen pretty consistently about 30 to 40% drop in traffic from organic search primarily. So I think that's obviously been a big change in terms of the metrics. And, of course, the underlying shift that's happening there is the introduction of AI overviews into the search results, which tend to kind of eat a lot of the traffic that was previously going to the open web. And then we also have even perhaps a larger shift, which is habit change, right? So people are using ChatGPT and Perplexity and these other tools to find information rather than Google. That, of course, is still a relatively small share of the market, but it has, I think, made a sizable impact as well on how people consume information and the amount of traffic and things that we're seeing in web.
Yeah, and I think I want to dig into this habit and behavioral changes because there's actually there was a state of search report that Datos, I don't know, I never know how to pronounce things these days, but they did earlier this year, and it actually suggested growth on traffic to channels like YouTube, that 3x'd in the last year, Pinterest 2x'd in the last year, and Reddit grew 30% in the last year. And I think that also speaks to those habit and behavioral shifts you're talking about, Tyler, in the sense that people are going to other platforms that they trust for the content they need. So it could be AI overviews, it could be ChatGPT and LLMs out there. But I think there's a shift in people wanting to find the source of the information on other platforms as well.
Yeah, I think to that point, Jana, I think that people, as well as brands and their stakeholders or their employees, are getting really good at sharing their perspectives directly on the platforms, you know? And so now this is known as zero-click searches or zero-click marketing. Amanda Navidad, I believe, was the kind of the
She's a queen of zero click. She defined it. Yes.
Yeah. And man, you know, she really tracked a trend that has come way more into fruition, even than when she was noting it in the first place. And she's completely right. You know, people are sharing their perspective. And now I think more people can get the information they need right directly on platforms. And so it's maybe creating more resonance right there in the platform. People are going there to get their information and they're finding it super useful and valuable right there.
And I think that's great. Like that's what we as human beings, like that's what I want when I'm on the internet. Like I don't want to have to click through a million different things to find the answer that I'm looking for. I want that answer there and then. So I can completely understand that from a user perspective. And I think as marketers, we have to sort of be okay with that too, right?
I was just going to mention, like, maybe that's the trend that, you know, AI has tapped into completely, right? It's the user wants the information fast. They want it direct. And if it's something informational or easy to compile the information right there, they're going to give it to you. So yeah, that's what I think is kind of happening now that this platforms are becoming way more influential than they had in the past.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think it's going to be funny to us looking back in the future at how things worked for so long and sort of the poor user experience that was, you know, kind of traditional search and having to sift through these long articles. You know, the trope, of course, is like the recipe content, right? Where you have like 2,000 words of like intro before you get to the recipe because everybody was playing this game. And it's like, well, that was objectively a terrible user experience, but we did it anyway because we had to. That was how it worked. That was just the game.
And now you have that handy jump to recipe link that I click every single time because I don't care what this person did on holiday and discover this amazing recipe that reminds them of, I don't know, who knows what. But you're right. Like we ourselves have got ourselves into this sort of position too by trying to lean too far into just like making sure we get those eyeballs and trying to get people into our websites. And I was even thinking about the fact that I remember when search engines first existed and Google still like first and Yahoo first existed, it was pretty normal for you to like click through multiple pages of search to get to the even like the page that you're looking for. And now it's just like, if you're not on that first page, you're in a dead zone. So it's kind of wild that like so many things have shifted technology wise, user experience wise, and what people actually want. And that's had an impact on content as much as I would say like the AI shifts that we're seeing in the last couple of years too.
Yeah, definitely.
And the other thing that kind of like I gravitated to with this question was the notion of a blog. I remember blogging way back then. Oh my God, I had a live journal. That's how long I've been in this kind of weird blogging sphere. Yes. I had a live journal. It was where I like collated my thoughts and published. But what about you guys?
Did you Team Zanga here, but
you're in good company, Jana. You're not alone. I think, and especially when you were reading our bios at the beginning, all of us with these 15, 20-year careers. Yes, we remember way back in the day. And I'm just trying to remember the platform I was on. It wasn't either of those two, but there was another one, and the name is eluding me right now, but I was there. My blog was called Life in the Fab Lane. That was my blog.
Oh, I like that. See, it's like, but like the word blog, it's derivative of like being a log of your life kind of deal. Like that's what like blogs were, but blogs have changed, and especially for companies who are still using the blog as like a centralized part of their content strategy. How should we redefine what blogs are nowadays?
That's a good question. I'm happy to jump in. I think to maybe kind of level set on that, I mean, I think that the term blog for most companies is basically just synonymous with the place on your website where content is published, which I think is totally fine. I mean, I think people that may be maybe sort of a distraction for some people to have it called a blog versus a library or resources or guides or whatever. In my mind, I see them generally as being synonymous for most companies. And I think like the idea of having a place to publish content, I think that is still a very important idea. And I think it's still an important part of most strategies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, to answer the question directly, is blogging dead? No. Is it
Yes.
changing? Yes, maybe, perhaps, right? And let's explore all of that in this conversation. But agree with Tyler, right? Like there's all there you need an owned place to share your content, share your perspective, share why your solution is different than your competitors, right? Share what made your brand come to life. What's your brand story? Like these are all the reasons why you need a place to have a space on your own website to share these thoughts and perspectives, and distributing them in different ways across these different platforms sure is always going to be necessary. And we already talked about all the ways in which these platforms are growing their influence over time. But the blog is your anchor point, in my opinion. It's that place where you are not limited by character count or length, right? You can really get into the nitty gritty details of your perspective and your thinking. And then you can funnel a customer journey. So while you can also start to funnel a customer journey from these other platforms as well, I think that the blog is the place where you start to get deeper conversations going and really give your users a reason why they might want to sign up for your newsletter or your webinar or whatever it might be that is that next step in the conversation. I think that these other platforms are a starting point for those conversations, but often you have to build your influence there over time in short, snackable bites. Whereas I think you get a much better place to build quick trust on a blog, because you're able to develop your thoughts and your perspective in a more extensive, thorough way.
Yeah, I'm glad you said the T word there. You said trust. And I think that's exactly what I think is synonymous with blogs too, because how do you know that the company or brand or business that you want to buy from or be a partnership with actually know what they're talking about, actually really understand you as a persona, understand your pain points? Like your blog is your centralized place to be able to showcase that. And fair enough. Like there are so many times I would go to blogs to learn, and I would remember the brands where I learned the most from and that were most beneficial to me. I might have not have been the buying persona at that time, but the brand will still stick in my memory. And eventually I may become, and like especially in B2B SaaS, for example, buying cycles are so long that you need to build up those memorable moments and those memory, like those little things that kind of help you remember a brand. And I think blogs, whether they're blogs, resource centers, guides, whatever you want to call them, libraries, I feel like your website in general should speak to one persona. Like that's the best way that you're going to get the best conversions out of your website to get people signing for a demo, signing up for a plan, whatever it is. But your blog has the opportunity to speak to potentially other personas that still are very, very valid for your product or service. So I think that's another area that I think blogs thrive in right now, and why I will never tell anyone to stop blogging.
For sure. I would like to go on the record that I'm also team let's rename the blog to something else. I think just as a term, it does carry a lot of baggage. There's a lot of like assumptions that are being made. And yeah, I think, I find myself instead of a blog, just because again, people have certain associations. But I wanted to go back to the original question, because I think there's maybe an underlying question there, which is essentially the way that we've approached content marketing or the blog in general has been that, you publish content there and then you either collect traffic from search. That's, been a big driver for a lot of companies, or you take that link to the blog post and you go post it on LinkedIn or whatever channels you're using for distribution, and you try to drive traffic back to the blog, right? And that was generally the playbook, depending on what your company was trying to do. And so I think there's a valid question there of like, is that still that in a world of zero click content, in a world of declining search traffic, is that even the way that we should approach things? I still think that the blog has value from like an operational perspective. I think that's something that people kind of overlook is you could take the ideas that you're going to put on your blog, you could try to turn that into a series of, let's say, LinkedIn posts or whatever, right? And distribute that same information through these zero click methods and never publish anything to your blog. That's a theoretical strategy that you could pursue. But I think what you will run into there, at least in my experience, is it's a lot harder to do that if you don't have like the long form version of the content where you're sort of drawing from the concepts and the ideas. And so I think one of the big sort of undervalued benefits of the blog is the sort of space to sit down and articulate an idea in its sort of complete version in a long form format, and then take that and turn it into smaller bits. It's a lot easier to do that than the reverse, right? Take a bunch of small short form pieces of content and try to cobble them together into something cohesive. And so I think just from like a purely like human, like operational perspective, it does feed a lot of the processes that we've built within content teams.
And those processes are important for sustainability. Like you need, as much as I hate to say it, like the content marketing is sort of a machine and it needs to run smoothly and needs to run logically. It needs to have like processes down to it. So like I completely agree with you there, Tyler. And I think the other thing that you mentioned too that really struck a chord with me is the idea of relying on channels like LinkedIn and social media and other channels just like puts a dagger to my core and makes me like panic and freak out a little bit, because you can't rely on those social media algorithms to always surface your content to your audience when you want it to. Like I get frustrated when I post something, I'm like, oh, this is great, my audience is gonna love it, and I add a link to it and it gets shoved down the algorithm, or I didn't post it exactly the right time and the algorithm hates. So like there's a relying on other channels for like to centralize your content marketing strategy just seems like a very dangerous thing to do. Risky. Because you are so reliant on those channels serving your content in a way that is going to be beneficial to you, and they're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about, well, this person's posted this great thing, exactly, their audience is going to love it. So it's so like owned channels like a blog or a newsletter or something like that where you can build an audience is sustainable, and it's going to be worthwhile in the long run too.
I think you make such a good point there, Jana, too, because we've seen, I don't know, in like 1 year, LinkedIn changes its algorithm 5 times.
1 year, it's been like every week it's 5 times.
Yes. I mean, honestly, right? So you really do need the anchor point that we're all talking about here, and then being able, how do you then take those thoughts and maybe try out those themes and those perspectives on LinkedIn to see, which your audience is clamoring onto, or, it's kind of experimental in some ways as well, right? Like which is going to get the highest reach or the most engagement, right? Like those are the things that I think LinkedIn and other channels, so, Instagram, the number of them can be great for is testing resonance. I think that's great for testing resonance. But in terms of making that where you hang your hat for your entire content marketing approach, yeah, I think we're all in agreement. That's not probably I think that whatever we want to call blogging in the future, I think that we all agree that having an own space where you can deep dive and have that longer in-depth conversation that builds the trust is going to continue to be relevant. It's going to continue to be need to be a part of the strategy.
Totally. Yeah. And one other thing that strikes me too is like, if we take sort of the negative side of, hey, search traffic is declining, it's harder to distribute like links via these other channels and stuff. A lot of people view that as a negative. And of course it is a negative when you look at the analytics and the charts going down. But if we sort of flip that on its head, the thing that it does from like a blog perspective for like your owned property and what you publish on your website is it sort of frees us as marketers to be able to create new and different types of content, to be more original. We don't have to check all the SEO boxes every time because we're not relying entirely on SEO to drive traffic. Now, it does make our job harder in other ways, of course, but the flip side of that is that we get to be more experimental, as Kristen was saying, and I think that applies across all different channels, including just like, what am I going to publish on my blog? And does it have to be optimized for search? Does it have to fit within the LinkedIn algorithm? Like, does it have to do all these things? Well, when the answer is no, then you can try a lot of new, interesting things that maybe wouldn't have worked when you were relying on those other channels for distribution.
I love that idea of using it as a reason, as like a really driving force for experimentation. And I think that's something that we might be a little bit scared to do because, I mean, I think you guys probably have a report out there that talks about the challenges and the issues and all of the weight on content marketers' shoulders. But experimentation, if you're able to really lean into it and be able to do it, it can make the job a little bit more fun. It can make you want to try different things just to see what's going to resonate with your audience. And maybe it doesn't resonate with your entire audience, but it resonates with a portion of your audience. So how can you double down on that? So I love the idea of leaning in onto experimentation. But you both mentioned the idea of kind of measurement, and going back to kind of, Tyler, what you said, like way back when, feels like way back when in this conversation, but it wasn't that long ago. But about measurement in a low and zero click word, like we were talking about, organic traffic is seen to be decreasing from things like Google. So how should content marketers then measure content performance in a world where people may not be clicking as often, or there literally is nothing to click?
That's a tricky one. Kristen, you want to jump in on that?
I threw a bomb right at you guys.
No, for sure. Okay, listen, the customer journey is so fragmented. It creates so many different channels to measure. You can't link one. I mean, it's hard to link one piece of content to a direct action. The reality is that, your audience is probably consuming 7, 8, 9, I don't know, different pieces of content before they actually convert. And so it is a challenge, and we can't, there's no way around it. There's no perfect model out there that exists for perfect content attribution. I do think, okay, so I've got a couple of competing thoughts going in my head. First one, in order to really measure content in today's world, where we are right now, we need to look at resonance as a real metric, right? And that goes into, before, when we were looking at SEO as driving a lot of opportunity, we were concerned about page views and clicks, okay? And that worked for a while. But we know that those numbers are coming down. Tyler gave us that great stat at the beginning that it's like, we don't want to keep pointing red arrows down, right? So like, what matters today? And so I think that's where you have to get into looking at the resonance of the content and really looking at engagement metrics. How deep are your readers going on that page of content? What next level actions are they taking from that content? Are they commenting? Who cares about a like? But are they commenting? Did whatever you say really strike a chord and made them viscerally want to react? I think those are the metrics on content itself that really matter. And then I also think when it comes to the attribution story, partnering up with the demand gen teams and the teams that kind of own a lot of the CRMs and trying to figure out how to form your attribution models to get as close as possible to those revenue goals is a really important strategy.
Yeah, and I think I'm a bit at odds with attribution models, mostly because I don't know, they all kind of suck to me. Maybe I should dive into that in another episode. But I think that there is alignment. Like, you have to understand what's, to me, the plainest way to put it is what's accelerating people to get to that ultimate conversion point. What pieces of content, like if you put a blog post out there, did it make people go down the funnel faster than another blog post, or was it a combination of things? What was that combination of things? And I think there are like, I would say, content marketing pieces that you can't see, and that's Reddit, that's Slack communities. Those are in-person events, real life conversations, you can't measure those. And I think, as I've gone on a tangent, but those are things that content marketers have to know exist and could be potentially having an impact on what's performing well and what's not. But we just have to know that, hey, that's happening somewhere in the background, so they could account for things. But Kristen, you pointed your finger and it looked like you had something to say.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought that point up about there's things that you can't measure. And guess what? That all ladders back up to brand marketing, because it's also hard to measure brand. But as you stated at the beginning, Jana, you are remembering when you pulled research from a source all those, months later. That stuck with you. Tyler and I have been collaborating. We are really seeing that 95% of your buyers are not looking to buy your solution today. And they will, so only 5% of the buyers are in market today. The other 95% will eventually come around, but you have to create memorability. And that's why I kind of talked about resonance as an important metric as well, because that is going to be those buyers remember you and come back to your brand when they're ready. So I think that content marketers need to get much better at creating the C-suite language to express these thoughts. Right now, there's a disconnect there in terms of how content marketers are talking about why it's important to not have exact measurement for everything and make it okay that, some of the content is actually bolstering and strengthening our brand. And that's equally as important.
Yeah, I have to jump in to add on because I think that's such a great stat, Kristen. I know there's another study that showed that 90% of buyers would ultimately choose someone that was on their day one list. So somebody that they already knew existed before they started a purchasing decision or a buying journey or however we want to frame it. They already knew that company existed. So that's, sort of, to me, that's like the connective tissue. That stat alone just kind of proves, hey, if we are building awareness and brand and affinity at that high level, even with folks who are not in market today, that will eventually translate into much higher conversions when they do enter the market or when they do begin that buying journey. So I think that's, it's so important to be thinking about that. Going back to your previous question, Jana, I do want to say that, like, I think a lot of the discomfort right now around content marketing and around the measurement question is because it was so easy before, relatively speaking, right? Like when we relied on SEO and when we could say, or, not everybody, I know Kristen always likes to point that out. Not everybody relied on SEO. A lot of our clients relied on SEO, and the story was very clear, right? We publish more blog posts. The blog posts rank for more keywords. We get more traffic. We see more conversions. Everything went up to the right. Everybody slept better at night. And so that was a very easy thing to correlate and track. And I think now, because the world is messier, it is harder to track. That's just the truth. And there's no getting around it. But I think, to go back to your question again, and my response there is twofold. One, I think it takes sort of a buffet of metrics, right? I don't think there is one set of metrics that's going to work. And as Kristen said, it's not going to be the same for every single company. It depends on which channels you're on, what your audience looks like, what your go-to-market strategy looks like. Is it a product-led motion or a sales? Like, there's all these different factors that are going to determine the right metrics. But I think it's about putting those metrics in place, tracking them consistently, and being able to draw those correlations in the same way that we used to do with SEO. It was just a lot easier to do it through one channel than it is through 10. But I think we can still get there. We just have to figure out how you integrate those metrics across different platforms. Oh, my second point was being very clear with the content that we're creating about what is the goal of that particular piece of content, right? So again, as Kristen mentioned, not every piece of content is going to drive a direct action, and certainly not today. And so if we try to measure it on that, it's going to be zeros across the board. It's going to look like we're doing nothing, right? But if you set your metrics that align with the various stages of the buyer's journey, and then you say, okay, this piece of content is aligned with this top of the funnel thing. These are the metrics that we use to measure that across the different platforms where we're distributing this content. Now you can get a much clearer picture of, is that particular piece of content doing its job? Is it correlated with future transactions or revenue or purchases or other actions that we're trying to ultimately drive? So I think those two things combined give you a lot more clarity. And again, I think that's just a little bit of the hard work that we have to do as marketers to like reconfigure those scorecards and figure out, okay, how do we track this across the 10 different touch points instead of 2 or 3 that we might have been playing with in the past.
And those 10 different touch points could be over years in some buying cycles. Like it's not something that happens in the next week. You don't send a newsletter out, someone clicks on it, and then immediately someone signs up for a demo, and then they've like signed up for a full plan like the next day. That just does not happen. The buying cycles have gotten so much more complicated because there are more people involved in them. They've gotten longer because I think economies worldwide, everywhere, everything's a little bit crazy right now. So there are so many external factors that play into some of these decisions that are happening right now in businesses that unfortunately it is harder for content marketers to really get down to it. But I love what you're both saying, that the fact that it's not just one metric now, it is a handful of metrics, and you need to align those group of metrics and KPIs to what the actual goal of that content piece is. And I think that's something that we forget, because again, we have this kind of need to continue just churning out content and like trying to think of like different ways of measuring it each time can feel really hard, but it can be done. It's just a bit of a journey, I think, for all of us. We're all on the same journey. That's the thing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's helpful to say this, so Jana, please feel free to edit this part out. But while we're on the topic of measurement and attribution, I will say, if you measure, you have a better chance of consistent growth. Versus if you don't measure, you have no idea, and it is just, it's a wild, wild west, whatever can happen. Because when you are measuring, then you're not just looking at the numbers, but you're seeing trends, and you're starting to understand how the content is performing. So sometimes it's also a matter of just like the consistency of the approach and measurement can help you optimize, because then you're really saying, oh, these people, this angle is really resonating with the audience. Maybe this one, we shouldn't invest that much effort over here because it's not really getting that much traction. Let's put more eggs in this type of this narrative, whatever. And so that's, I believe, a key to consistent growth is you just get better at knowing what's working.
Yeah. I want to jump in there because that reminded me, Kristen, we were having a conversation the other day with our friend Kurt Woodward, who is one of the leaders of content over at Zoom Info. And one of the things that he said that really struck with me was, as a content leader, a big part of your job is just like getting credit, right? And so doing that work to be able to go to your boss or your CEO or whoever it is that you report into and say, look, here's the proof that the things that we're doing matter. And I think, again, I know the flip side of that coin is one of the things that we found in our study, right? Which is that everybody's hair is on fire. They're trying to do 100 different things. They're just trying to survive through the day. Like, they don't have the time or the energy or the bandwidth to spend a whole week out of the month doing reporting, or it certainly feels that way. And I think like that's the real sort of sticking point where we're at right now with content, is as content marketers are being asked to do more and more and more, but we also simultaneously need to carve out more time for strategy and for measurement and for like figuring out what's going to work. And so I think that's where the job right now as a content leader, as hard as it is like convincing your boss or your CEO or whoever it is, again, that is just as important as churning out 6 blog posts a week or whatever the arbitrary metric is. So yeah, and I empathize with anybody who has to have those conversations, because it's not easy to do right now. It feels like an arms race all the way around, but I think we have to find a way to change that discussion internally.
But I bet you, if you say, hey, we're going to stop doing content altogether, that would cause some panic. Can you imagine?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So like it's kind of, they know they need it, and they know they need a lot of it, but they don't necessarily know what they need, but they will never just turn that tap off cold turkey and just be like, yep, we're not doing it, because you have
maybe
content.
This transitions us into a whole topic altogether. But I think, especially with the curiosity, I think a lot of maybe leaders are like, well, can't AI do that? And I know all of us are going to say that's not the right approach, but if again, I think this all adds up to the complexity and the reason that Tyler and I have found that content marketers are burned out is that there is so much pressure on this function today. It's measurement, it's strategy, it's oh my gosh, there's a new tool that can do my job. Like it's a lot of pressure, and content marketers are facing a crisis of confidence right now.
I feel like we just to start like get our hankies out and start crying collectively for content marketers out there. We know that people are actually using AI and they're using LLMs more often to find the information they need. So if the three of us asked the same question in Perplexity or Claude or ChatGPT, we would all get completely different answers because that's just the nature of the beast, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you go about optimizing what you're doing for content to have a presence in AI? Is that unpacking like a big thing right now? Should we not try to do this?
Tyler,
No. Okay. Well, I could definitely turn this into a whole different hour long conversation. I will try to condense my thoughts very succinctly. I think the short answer is there's lots of tactical stuff we can do to try to optimize for like a baseline of visibility across LLMs. I mean, we know that there's been lots of studies, there's lots of correlation. It is important to note it's all correlation right now. Nobody knows exactly how this stuff works, and it's non-deterministic, as you said, Jaina. So everybody's going to get different outputs for the most part. Your experience is going to be customized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, yeah, there are certain little things that we know, hey, ChatGPT tends to prefer, these specific structures and formats and ways that you can optimize your content. It's very similar, not necessarily exactly the same, but very similar to the types of things that we've done for SEO for years. So yes, you can sort of tactically optimize your content, but I think the much bigger conversation that a lot of people are missing, and frankly, again, I think because everybody's hair is on fire and they're trying to juggle 1,000 different things at once right now, is that like really it's about shaping the conversation. Right? It's great if I show up as a source when somebody asks ChatGPT what is content marketing, but we're falling right back into the same SEO trap that everybody was in, where it's like we were just chasing like the vanity clicks and impressions, and we're not really shaping anything that's going to drive business value. And going back to the original question, what is the purpose of a blog in 2025 in the world of declining search traffic and AI and all this stuff? I think it's about defining your brand's unique perspective. It's the place where you get to sit down and really craft, here is the narrative that we're telling as a business, and here's how it connects our buyers to our solution. And this is the unique perspective that we bring to the industry or to the market. And I think that is really the space to do that. Once again, that content and those ideas are going to be distributed across other channels, but they're also likely to be ingested by these LLMs, right? So it's much more powerful if an LLM says, hey, you have this problem with attribution for your content marketing. You should look up this framework that Optimus created on how to measure your content marketing, right? So if I can develop that concept and that narrative and put that out into the world as my unique point of view as a brand, that is going to be much more impactful in a world where AI is surfacing those types of insights and those types of ideas directly to a user as they're going through their journey, right? They're having that conversation off your website, but you can still steer people towards your solution in a really interesting way.
I couldn't agree more than what Tyler is saying. And to add on, he and I are collaborating on a new project that is like going to pull this thinking forward 100%, like 10 times, 100 times where we are today, right? But to kind of share a little bit more thinking there, commodity content is a real problem in the age of AI, meaning that it will spit out an article that you ask it to write in 10 seconds flat. And if you are asking that same question, so is all of your competitors, right? And so there is no distinguishability between you and your competitor times 10. That's a real problem for brand authority right now. So who's to say that if you're writing the same stuff as everybody else, actually, as we have been doing in the SEO world as well, because didn't Google orient us all to write the same article on the same topic? It sure did. And where did that leave us? Well, we've got a blog full of commodity content now that maybe fragments the customer journey even further, certainly maybe doesn't connect it in any meaningful way. And it's like, and now SEO isn't even working as much. So the value we put into all of that is kind of backtracking in 2025. So this is where, to Tyler's point, how do you, I think the question here for content marketers to consider when they think about their strategy is, how do you distinguish your brand? What are the key narratives that your company, first of all, let's think audience first. What does your audience need? What are their pain points, their expectations of you, of the space that you're in? And how do you uniquely serve them different than your competitors? So maybe this is also some competitive differentiation you need to look into.
Yes.
Because maybe you haven't been really thinking too much about how you are that different from that guy over there, right?
Yeah.
And so, so we're in the content marketing's flipped on its head for sure. And there are some brands that have been using the strategy for a very long time. If we look at Gong, for example, with revenue intelligence, they created that conversation. It was never a term before they used it. And no, they weren't complaining about no SEO traffic, because guess what? They generated that SEO traffic on their own. And that resulted in millions of searches on an annual basis. So this strategy works from many, many different levels. And it's something that I think Tyler and I feel very strongly is going to be the way forward.
Yeah. And I think if there's a way to connect with your audience through the content, like you said, like have that like brand trust, brand authority, like that's what we did at Litmus. We sympathized with email developers, we sympathized with email designers, and came up with content that was well researched, that was the kind of content that we knew was going to serve them on a daily basis. So they would always bookmark that one blog post about dark mode or Outlook or something like that would keep them coming back. But I do think if you focus so much on commodity content, I do think there's a way for you to bring that back and make it relevant now by inserting your opinion into that commodity content, by inserting other people's opinions to raise the authority of that content. And I think a lot of brands are also probably a little bit afraid of coming up with a really strong brand perspective because they don't want to piss people off or they don't want to upset people. I think more brands need to be braver about that. They need to make
Definitely
a perspective that is going to have a reaction from like people are going to remember the brand because they had a reaction. I'm not saying like a visceral, painful reaction, but like something that is memorable. And I think we feel like we've talked about being memorable as a brand through content throughout this entire recording.
Yeah. I think the way that I think about it, and I've sort of been throwing this language at Kristen to see what sticks, is like I think the job of this content and this idea that we've been working on is basically how do you create like radical sense of clarity for your audience where they understand their problems in a totally new context. And then to your point, Jaina, like, that's not going to resonate with every single person that's a potential buyer, but the people who do resonate with it are going to immediately be attracted to that idea. And if you can say, here's how you should be thinking about this, here's how you should solve it, and here's how our product is uniquely positioned to solve that problem or that solution, I think that's where you really you galvanize a whole segment of your market to be sort of extreme loyalist to your thinking, right? And I think that if we really go back to marketing 101, like it's all about segments, right? It's all about identifying specific audiences within a larger set of buyers and figuring out how do we appeal to those people. It's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's going to appeal very strongly to the people that you're trying to target.
That's all that matters, really. And go ahead, Kristen.
And I was going to say, Jaina, to your point about, alienating people, and to Tyler's as well, like, look, isn't that like what people do on podcasts all day long? I feel like everything said today is a perspective. And there might not be people who agree with this thinking, but there's probably a lot who do. And those are the people who are on the journey with us, right? And willing to explore this new, better future. So I think that the perspective is something that actually gets people excited about and want to join in the conversation in a way that, like, how to get a better night's sleep isn't going to generate that much conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, I think this conversation and probably honestly your entire podcast, Jaina, is such a great illustration of this, right? Because it's like, look, we are grappling with these like fundamental problems, and if I could come on this podcast and tell you, look, the way that you're thinking about content marketing is totally wrong. Here's exactly how to approach it in a different and new and better way. People are gonna immediately gravitate towards that, right? Your audience has the same thing, right? They have their same problems that are just like this, like. Content marketers, as we are all very special, but we are not unique in that everybody has their own version of these problems that they're dealing with, whether it's, AI is trying to take their job, or, their boss doesn't give them enough ownership over the work they're doing, whatever it is. And so to whatever extent you can come into that conversation and say, hey, we get it. We understand the problems that you're dealing with. And here's a very clear and novel way to address those problems. The other example that Kristen and I have talked a lot about is 37 Signals, the guys who make Basecamp, right? They published this book Rework, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, however long it was now. And, it like lit the world on fire in a segment of the world, right? A segment of the world. Not everybody buys into the idea of rework, but the people who do are, again, in love with that methodology, that thinking, their products, their brand. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about as content marketers. And the cool thing, in my opinion, is that content folks can be the masters of that narrative, right? Yes. That can be sort of the new version of what is your job as a content marketer. It's to establish that narrative, own that narrative, protect that narrative, and make sure that you're speaking to your audience in a real and authentic way and really meeting their needs. I think we just need to continue to evolve that conversation internally to shift what it means to be a content marketer or a content leader.
And by the way, this is the way that you also can orchestrate internal alignment. I know that, so many different content marketers have a hard time because they're siloed and they're siloed in their, like maybe an order taker position, and they have a hard time finding a voice at the table. But like, if you can imagine the world where you have the narrative that resonates with the audience, and that is now extensible in product marketing, sales conversations, PR, because PR is becoming a much more, it's coming back, right? Like much more powerful driver of marketing as well. And now you can take that narrative to your PR team and ask them to pitch the outlets that matter to your space, because you actually have a perspective. This can orchestrate all of the different layers within the organization in a way that SEO could not previously.
I feel like that segues perfectly into like really coming what the answer is that we're getting to here, and that is blogs aren't dead, and content marketing is more than just publishing content on a blog to appease rankings and being seen, but they're about creating connections, building relationships, building trust and authority for your brand. And AI is not going to go anywhere. It's changing every single day. What the impact of AI in a content marketer's role and how well content performs on the web, AI is changing that every single day. So I don't know whether we can answer like where the shifts are, because I feel like as soon as this public podcast gets published, there's going to be some new set of data, or AI is going to be doing something else completely different, and it's going to date this content totally. But I think what we can all agree on is that content marketing is not going anywhere. It's adapting and changing to users' behavior and habits more than anything else too. So I feel like there's some nods there. So I feel like it's a good place for us to take a beat. But thank you, Tyler and Kristen, for joining me. Before you go, I have a couple of questions that I'm going to throw at you without any prep work. One's a pretty fun one, and one's a deeper one, but you can make it whatever you want to make it.
The opposite of.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Hopefully not complete opposite, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, my first question for you both is, what is your go-to pizza topping?
Ew, Kristen hit her.
Pizza topping? Did I hear that?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, Oh, I got it. Because pizza's my favorite food. I love meatball on my pizza, you guys. I'm a true Italian over here.
Love it. Love it. Tyler?
I'm like a sweet and spicy kind of fan, so I like a pepperoni and like pineapple or something like that, or yeah, good combo like that.
Controversy with the pineapple there. I feel like that's going to get people.
Oh, I
like,
just
and
ignore
we
the
said,
haters. Look, if you come out with a framework for content marketing that's all about pineapple on pizza, I'm gonna be a fan for life.
someone's going to do it. Someone's going to do it. And then the second question I have is, what's the best piece of advice you have ever received? Doesn't have to be about marketing. It could be about anything in general, but what's the best piece of advice you've received? And it's a tough one.
Oh, it is a tough one. I think for me, I can't probably trace this back to like one thing that one person has told me, but I think the overarching advice is, sort of control the things you can control all the things that are within your power. I think especially as marketers and as content folks right now, as we've just talked about, right? So much is in flux. So much of those changes are outside of our control. We're sort of at the whims of the algorithm or whatever, but there are very clearly levers that you can control as a content person. And so I think it's all about just trying to own those levers. I mean, I think about that, pretty much every day when I'm like, I'm having a sales conversation or I'm talking to a client or we're looking at reporting or whatever it is, right? I can't change the numbers, but I can control how we present those numbers or what they look like or who we share them with, those types of variables. So I think, you have a lot more power, I think, than you maybe think you do, even when it feels like everything's out of your control. The reality is usually the opposite in my experience. So,
Okay, I got so absorbed in Tyler's, but I don't know that anybody has ever directly given me this advice, but it's through my lived experience. And I think, over time, just the little messages have come through that this is kind of a good thing to do, right? So I've always, in my career, I've worked in, like you said, companies of all sizes. But early on in my career, I worked for very small agencies, and I was working directly with the entrepreneur who was leading that agency in two different scenarios over about 8 years. And I was always, cultivated, I guess, the term kind of, advised, or, they always allowed me the room to use my voice and share my perspective and my thinking, and actually really helped me hone my strategic thinking. And probably because I was so close to those who were running the business in a way that I think, it's harder maybe early on in your career if you're in a big company and you're just you're in a role or a function where you just have a set of tasks to do. You're not trained how to think strategically for a while. But I think that that kind of modeling and how they went out and provided the most amount of value to their clients, and how they were always out there just with this mindset of, I'm going to deliver as much value to you as I possibly can, and I'm going to lend what's in here to you, as a way to differentiate our brand. And I think for me, as that has materialized over my career, is I've never felt too shy about, sharing my thoughts and my perspective. And I think that's only served me well in my career. And so I guess to wrap this all up with a bow, I guess the advice is, don't be afraid to use your voice.
I love that. Great pieces of advice. And I kind of lied because I've got a third question. It's an easy one, though. How and where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me. Probably the easiest way is on LinkedIn. Obviously, Tyler Hakes. You can also find my agency at yesoptimist.com.
Go, Tyler, that the best way to find me is LinkedIn at Kristen Rocco. And maybe, Jana, I don't know if you'd be interested in putting our research in the show notes, but
yes,
it has been something that content marketers have really enjoyed reading, and they found a lot of valuable insight in there. And so if you're open to it, we'd love for you to link that as well.
I'll absolutely link that in the show notes. I love that piece of the research that you guys have done there. So I'm definitely going to link that out. But thank you again for joining me for this podcast and helping answer Taryn's question there. But if you have a question out there, or you're not sure who to ask, send it my way. You'll find the submission link in the show notes. And if you like this episode, subscribe and tell your marketing friends. Season 1 is up in its entirety. And remember, there are no stupid questions, just marketing ones.